Welcome to the Change the Balance podcast and YouTube channel, where we are opening up hearts, minds and souls to explore the challenges, barriers and opportunities available to leaders who are creating safe and inclusive spaces. We're Sabrina, Shadie, Ethics and Equity Specialist, and Charlotte, Hopkins, Learning and Development Expert. Together, along with our guests, we will be sharing our personal journeys, inspirational stories and top tips on how we are becoming allies that tackle stigma, prejudice and discrimination head on. Hey, hi, hello, and a huge welcome back to the Change the Balance podcast. I can't believe we're on episode 6. Can you believe we're on episode 6?
No, time flies every time we were together.
I know, episode 6. So today we're going to be sharing what our kind of bigger vision is with not just Change the Balance, but Sabrina and I are pretty ambitious. And so we thought we would share a little bit about what that vision looks like from both perspectives and what equity really means. And, you know, that is our biggest ambition. It's all about equity. So, yeah, that's what episode 6 is going to be about.
Yeah, so the word equity, you hear probably thrown around quite a lot. And for me, I think it's really about understanding the value of the individual.
Yeah, that's such a good sentence.
Yeah, exactly that. So we talk, you know, the legal parameters around equality and trying to make things equally accessible, which doesn't mean that everyone gets the same. It means if you need more support, you get reasonable adjustments, and that makes things more accessible for you.
Yeah.
And that's a great starting point, but that is just a starting point. When we talk about best practice, we're talking about equity, and that's like almost the other end of the spectrum. That's like way beyond the baseline that the legal requirements and compliance set out, because equity provides us with the opportunity to really look at the value of the individual in terms of what they bring and what we need to invest to help them really attain their potential.
Yeah.
So the example that I like to give is Stephen Hopkins. I think he's such an amazing role model.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, resilience and pushing through barriers. But actually, the people around him, you know, we look at him and go, oh, look at this person, he's got an amazing, you know, genius brain. Yeah. We would never have known if he hadn't have been valued in terms of his equity as an individual.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it's really interesting about that support. And I think whilst there's a brilliant role model there, it also shows that he's got brilliant role models around him from an allyship perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you can also talk about the privilege and stuff, because my guy was already in, you know, had a place at the top university before his condition got to the point that he needed that level of physical support. So there is a level of privilege involved in his story as well. However, when we're talking about the equity part, if you took away all of his amazing support, the machine, his wheelchair, the box that helped him speak and engage and communicate, how would we have known he had all that potential?
And there's plenty of people. I mean, there's plenty of people who will have gone through various different, whether it's illnesses, you know, whether it's genetic, whether it's an accident. There's plenty of people who are excelling before that, and it's a horrible word, deterioration, but before the kind of immobility is present, I guess. But they don't have that support
around
to be able to, and I guess mindset. There's got to be something there about, you know, that glass half empty, glass half full, or, you know, sod it, we can fill the glass back up again. So mindset plays a massive impact. And I think when we look at helping people really be able to release that value, there's lots at play that makes it a real challenge. And when you talk about that kind of baseline of equality and then equity, there's lots and lots of things that we still have to do to remove those blocks away from people, regardless of whether, you know, you're Stephen Hawkins or whether you're, you know, average Joe Blogs down the road who's just struggling with depression.
Absolutely. And the reason I use Stephen Hawkins is because he is such a well-known, B, really obvious support that went into enabling him to be, you know, a prize-winning author and so on and so forth. That just allows us to understand that without all of that stuff, would we have known how good he was? Probably not. So if we could invest that level in everybody along the whole spectrum of need, imagine the potential outcomes we might see from those people.
And I think it's
from kids in school, if we talk about like from the starting point of kids in school, where they probably have a different learning style, not even a disability or anything as significant as that, but just a slightly different learning style. Our young people who are on the autistic spectrum, or our young people who maybe have ADHD traits, who are being labelled as being naughty or badly behaved, but actually they have a bit of a fidget, or they have a bit of a attention disorder, which could easily be managed if the resources were there and invested in them at that time. They could still engage in formal education rather than ending up in a different kind of education system, which doesn't give them the same outcomes.
And that's such an important thing to start with. And I think people often say, well, we don't have the resources, or I don't have the capacity. And I actually think that often it's just listening. You just listen to understand. And it sounds really simplistic, but I genuinely believe that to allow people to step into, and I use the word power, but step into their personal power, you just need to be listened to. Yes, there's an element of creating that kind of safe and inclusive spaces. It's really important that people feel comfortable to be able to do that. How do we feel comfortable? Well, when we're listened to. So it's really not as complicated as it needs to be either.
And that's the thing with equity, it's really about having the conversation. So asking the person involved, maybe asking their support network as well. So when we worked in like youth offending, for example, back in the olden days, part of our remit was we had to speak to family members, whether that was parents or whoever the primary carers were, but also siblings, because these are young people, probably under 16, under 15, sometimes as young as 10. So talking to that network helped us really gather things that the kids wouldn't necessarily say themselves, but which mum and dad or a sibling or an auntie or whatever might give us a little insight into what's going on for that child, so that we can provide a better support package. And that to me is where equity really comes in. It's about giving the people the autonomy to identify actually what I need. I know by assessment it tells you I need A, B and C, but that doesn't work for me, because I don't just have this condition, I then have this thing overlaid with that. So what my needs are slightly different, and I need actually X, Y and Z. But you can't do that without the conversation. There's no cookie cutter version of equality, diversity, inclusion, which is why equity kind of trumps all of that.
Absolutely. I do a lot of work within the drug and alcohol space and mental health space, homelessness, housing. And one of the things we talk a lot about is we can make assumptions, and I know we're taught not to make assumptions, but we can make assumptions that if somebody's in challenging positions, that they've got lots going on, their lives are quite complex, that somewhere there's probably a bit of stress, there's probably a bit of trauma. We know from the research that there's lots of maybe neglect or abuse that's taken place. So we know that these people have lots going on, or have had lots going on. Why do we need to assess that every single time? Why can't we just say, what's going on for you right now, and how can I help you move forward? And we do a lot of risk assessments, because how do I say this without offending? We do a lot of risk assessments to help us, quote unquote, identify the safety plans. Now, I always question, who are the safety plans for? Do we have to absolutely look at the safety of staff working within, projects? Of course we do. We have to think about residents. We have to think about our staff. We have to think about all of these other people as well. However, when we look at trauma and re-traumatization, there's nothing worse to me than seeing somebody recall their childhood with no emotion, because what that really shows to me is that they've gone over and over and over and over it.
They've got to that disconnected.
If somebody's not communicating in the way that we want them to communicate, isn't it, whether we're parents, whether we're workers, whether we're leaders, whether we're managers, whether we're in HR, whether we're in youth offending, wherever we are, is it not our role as the responsible adult, or within that role and responsibility, to take the lead and lead with maybe a little bit of compassion, maybe listening to understand, and maybe thinking, okay, I want to help this person. What do they need? Not what do I need?
Yeah. And that's, I think, as professionals, particularly in the public sector, health, social care and education environments, we do go in with this prerequisite of like a checklist. Right, well, I've got to do the risk assessment, I've got to do the health and safety checks, I've got to do and it's like without once going, where are they at and what do they need?
Yeah.
And I think actually when we're talking in terms of HR, the pressures can be very similar. Like, we've got to do the interview review, or we've got to do your appraisal, and it's not really about the person as much as on the appearances it's not actually. So we find it with Occupational Health as well. Sometimes, you know, managers are going, I need the occupational health report to explain what reasonable adjustments and to pull down the funding to do it.
Yeah.
But it's not about actually, is it that we need a fancy chair, or is it that we need a little bit more flexibility around break times?
Yeah.
You know, like there's so much more gradients to how we can help people.
Yeah. And I just keep coming back to that listening. I remember going into an organization and the staff dissatisfaction was really, really high. And they were really struggling with staff retention. They had theft that was going on in the organization. The take-ins were really, so much lower than they were expecting. And I remember going in, and I was only young. I was 20. Well, I had Lauren at 22, so I would have been about 20, maybe 21. And I remember going in and just sitting them down, having a team meeting and saying, right, what's going on?
Yeah.
You tell me from a staff's perspective, you tell me from a management perspective, you tell me from a kind of not owner, but the general manager perspective. And when you listen to all three of what was going wrong, basically nobody felt listened to. So therefore we had this kind of oppressive approach to, you will do this. The lower managers then were stressed because they, you know what it's like, middle managers, who would be
Squeezed
one?
right in the
Oh
middle.
my goodness. Yeah. But actually all the staff wanted was a break time. And all we did was implement break times. And when the staff went, oh no, we're too busy, I was like, no, you go, because you've demanded breaks. You go and have your
Take
break.
your breaks. Yeah.
That 5-minute break was going to not impact customer service whatsoever in any really meaningful way. What that meant was when we had international days, so rugby international days, what that meant was when we were genuinely packed and we couldn't really squeeze breaks in at the time that we needed to, then people and staff were far more flexible to go above and beyond.
And there we have like a really good example of how investing in equity and investing in the culture of equity allows us to actually be more productive and more inclusive as a overall team or organization. We have kind of great examples of this in all different kinds of walks, but that's a really nice one. And we have you know, the culture part of equity, like it's got to be part of the organizational culture. You can't have a big sign up on the wall going, oh yeah, we cherish everyone's individuality and equity, and then a system that says if you don't fit into this box, you know, we can't provide you the support you need. So it is more time consuming, but the results are really, really clear in terms of the loyalty you have from your staff and your team. The levels of engagement usually are really like evidently improved within, I would almost say, like minutes, you know, and people start feeling like this is somewhere I want to be and somewhere I'm cared for. That two-way process is so quickly evidenced, just in the way that people show up.
Absolutely. I remember I've been quite fortunate. I've had pretty good managers, male and female, pretty good managers. But there was one in particular, and she gave lots of autonomy. And I'm not, you know, I always make a joke that I'm not employable anymore. And I remember her saying to me, Charlotte, you've always managed up. So I would go in and she would give me that space. She would give me that. If I needed somebody just to go, blah, 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 she would listen. If I needed to go in and go, rah, she would listen. And it didn't matter really how busy she was. The door was always open. And I think for me, for her, I'm sure at times it was a real headache. But for me, I just needed that space. by the time we got to know each other and work together properly, within 12 months, I knew what she would say yes and no to. We were able to build that relationship that meant that if I did something, and I did catastrophically mess up, I signed our charity up for a £5,000 a year list that was part of the World Trade Organization, which obviously is based in America, which had no bearings on a little Welsh charity whatsoever. I messed up considerably there, but she was able to say, okay, let's look at what happened so that we can learn from it.
Yeah.
But there was no penalties as such, because she knew that I would beat myself up more. 10 years on, or longer than that, 15 years on, and I'm still talking about it and still holding on to it. So I think that when you allow for genuine equity, not only does it increase that productivity and that performance and that loyalty, but I think it really also brings that innovation and that creativity. And that, as an organization, is something that is just brilliant for problem solving and solution finding. I always say that your answers are within your organization, and the grassroots of an organization usually has the answers to pretty much any problem that a boardroom is having.
Yeah, and I would echo that hugely. So for me, my first role as a manager started out as, I got employed as a sort of team leader, and then there's just this vacuum above me because nobody wanted the job to look after the team who looked after the kids that we looked after. Like, nobody wanted that job, so I ended up getting promoted to like manager, head of department, and I was just like, there's still this massive vacuum. And I developed my own team, and I was literally allowed to just write the job descriptions, develop all the systems. But by doing that, I was given so much equity. I was allowed to devise exactly what was needed. And I'd worked at the lower level of the team, from, I'm one of those managers, I don't ask my team to do something I wouldn't do. So I'd cleaned toilets, and I had prepared the buildings for our students coming back in the September intake. We had done all of that horrible preparation stuff because we had no staff.
Yeah.
We're starting from scratch. Then I had to interview and write all policies and develop it really from nothing. Within 3 years, I had an amazing team. Yeah. They loved each other like it was like a family. Yeah. I didn't have to ask them, well, somebody's off sick, I need someone to cover. The person who was off sick would have just texted everyone saying, I'm sick, I can't work my shift this weekend. Yeah. And somebody would have messaged me saying, Sabrina, blah, blah, sick, but I'm going to pick up their shift.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I'm not even managing anymore. Everyone's managing themselves in such a brilliant way because they've got the space to do it, because they've got the autonomy. Yeah. Because we trust each other in a way that nobody's ever left out. No one ever feels that they can't come forward with issues.
Yeah.
And that team, like 3 or 4 people from that team still call me governor. And I've not worked with them for like 7 or 8 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So what's then the kind of, what's your vision in regards to what we're doing in Change the Balance and building that kind of equity?
Really, for me, I think it's about the culture that we're able to really build and provide people with the confidence to build those cultures where they are. So a lot of us, when we're talking about being allies, that's not our lived experience, and we can be very resistant to having conversations or stepping into spaces where we feel that's maybe not for us. There's somebody else that's better equipped or deserves to have that space. But actually creating a culture where we go, this is not my space, but I'm going to make sure that you recognise it's your space, and I'm going to make this a protected area for you to do what you need to do to make the changes. It's that kind of ability, because again, that's about communication. That's about being able to have that conversation with somebody and ask them the questions and actually comfortably say, do you know what, this is not for me, but I can make it for you, and I can make sure that that's safe for you. But you can only do that if you talk to the person. Like, if you do it without having spoken to them and you just chuck a spotlight on someone and go, oh yeah, you've got a disability, so
you're going to have the answer for everybody.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about having those conversations with individuals and being able to support and promote them in the same way that you would with any other environment. If you've got a member of your team who's particularly good at a particular, let them do that thing. You encourage them and you build that skill. And I think talking about equality, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, well-being, these things are skills. these things are around, yes, personal experience, but also how that then translates into building a better environment, a better culture, better lines of communication. So for me, it's about that recognizing the culture and recognizing the humanity that we all have. It's not complicated.
No, it's not
doesn't
complicated.
Have to be,
yeah,
you know, really, intersectionality, what does that mean? And in terms of reference and policies, and it's not necessarily just about that. It's actually much more about humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously I would echo all of that, but for me, it is about creating that safe and inclusive space that is, allowing people to thrive and to grow as people and to recognize the need for unity. And I agree. I don't think it has to be complicated. I think it comes down to, looking at genuine support for people where they need it. And not everybody will buy into that. We absolutely take on board that those of you listening into the podcast, especially by episode 6, will be, on board with our kind of vision as well. And I think it flows right the way through from the recruitment process, right the way through to exit planning, and really understanding why people are maybe leaving the organization, what that turnover is, and looking at, holding people accountable. So for me, it's all about creating safe spaces where people are able to be included and to kind of take away the fear factor. I think for me, equity is about not being scared to have those conversations, making sure that we feel, yes, legally we know what our responsibilities are in HR or as leaders, as managers, but also really understanding the nuances of the humanity. And I think that's probably the biggest vision for me with Change the Balance, is allowing people to have that open dialogue. It's such an important part of creating genuine equity.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, the point of doing this is to equip people to be in those positions, to be able to make those judgments from a really well supported place. Being in a leadership position could be really lonely and quite isolating. But having a package and the support behind you, that you feel equipped, you've got the knowledge, there's somewhere you can go to get additional advice and support to allow you to go out into the world and make those changes and be that kind of beacon of good practice. And share that with your your ecosystem, whatever that might be. Because we can't, as 2 individual human beings, we cannot change the entire world, just the 2 of us. No, but actually by kind of building this into other leaders and saying to them, take this and go and spread it around and give it to everyone, and that allows us to have much bigger reach and make a much bigger change in a much shorter time.
Yeah. And then on that note, really, just as we finish up, then if you've got people who you think would really resonate with the podcast, then share it. We need those people to join this kind of rebellion, I guess. We want this rebellion of people who are prepared to, invest in people. That's what it's about. So if you know anybody who, should be listening to the Change the Balance podcast, absolutely share the links. If you think you would be a brilliant guest, and somebody who could share what maybe you've done within your organization, or how you've become a better ally, or what you've done to maybe improve services for you because you saw that there was challenges, then absolutely feel free to get in contact with Sabrina or myself, and we will always have a chat with the people who are doing excellent work and becoming game changers. But thank you so much for listening to episode 6, and we will see you on the other side.
Thank you so much.